My name is Clara, and for as long as I can remember, I've been the practical one in my family. At my younger sister Sophie's wedding reception, my father raised a glass and made a toast, laughing as he said, and a special thanks to my older daughter Clara, whose little planning hobby finally came in handy. The crowd chuckled, politely. What they didn't know, what my family certainly didn't know, was that my little hobby owned the very ground they were standing on, and I was just moments away from signing a document that would expose a lifetime of secrets. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Before I tell you how that night unfolded, hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your own voice when everyone else is trying to silence you. Growing up, my world was painted in two distinct colors: Sophie's vibrant, dazzling sparkle and my muted, dependable beige. I am 32 years old, an event planner. My sister Sophie is 28, and her profession has always been, well, being Sophie. She was born with a magnetism that I never had. While I had my nose in books learning about logistics and budgeting, Sophie was learning how to command a room with a single smile. Our parents, Mark and Helen, were her biggest fans. They saw her charm as a sign of future greatness, while they saw my diligence as simply my duty. The pattern was set early. When I was 16, I worked all summer at a local bakery to save up for my first car, a reliable but boring used sedan. The day I brought it home, proud of my hard work, my parents nodded approvingly. "See, that's our practical Clara," my dad said. 2 months later, for Sophie's 16th birthday, they bought her a brand new convertible. When I asked why there was a difference, my mother explained with a sigh, "Sophie just isn't the type to work in a bakery, sweetie. She needs to protect her image." This dynamic followed us into adulthood. I put myself through college with a combination of scholarships and part-time jobs, graduating with a degree in hospitality management. I started my own event planning business, Elysian Events, from my tiny apartment, with nothing but a laptop and a relentless work ethic. The first few years were grueling. I worked 80-hour weeks, taking on any client I could, from children's birthday parties to small corporate gatherings. Meanwhile, our parents funded 3 of Sophie's failed business ventures: a high-end dog clothing line, a subscription box for spiritual crystals, and a short-lived career as an influencer. Each time a business collapsed, they would absorb the loss, telling everyone Sophie is a creative soul. You can't put a price on passion. But they could, and they did, to the tune of tens of thousands of dollars. My success, when it began to grow, was treated with a strange sort of dismissal. I organized every family holiday, every anniversary party, every significant milestone, all for free. My meticulously planned events were praised, but my role was minimized. "Clara is just so good at this stuff," my mom would tell guests, as if I had been born with a spreadsheet in my hand. They never asked about my business, my clients, or my ambitions. To them, Elysian Events was just a cute little hobby, something to keep me busy. They had no idea that my hobby had grown into one of the most respected event firms in the state, with a roster of high-profile corporate clients and a team of 12 employees. I never corrected them. A part of me, I think, was tired of trying to win their approval. I decided to let my work speak for itself, even if they refused to listen. The real insult, the one that stung the most, came a few years ago. My father's company was celebrating its 25th anniversary and needed to host a major gala for investors and international partners. They hired a prestigious event firm from out of state. When I found out, I was crushed. I gently asked my father why he hadn't considered my company. He looked almost embarrassed. "Honey, this is a major corporate event. It's a different league," he explained, patting my shoulder. "We needed real professionals. Your thing is more for, family stuff." I remember smiling, nodding, and then going to my car and crying for 10 minutes. The firm they hired ended up botching the lighting and having a major catering issue, problems I could have solved in my sleep. But it didn't matter. In their eyes, I would always be the amateur, the hobbyist. I poured my frustration into my work, doubling down on my goals. I promised myself that one day my success would be so undeniable that even they couldn't ignore it. I thought her wedding would just be one more family event to organize and endure. I had no idea it would become the stage for a confrontation that would change the very definition of our family forever. The storm arrived in the form of a 2-carat diamond ring. Sophie got engaged to Liam, a perfectly nice investment banker who seemed completely captivated by her. He was stable, successful, and ready to give her the world. My parents were ecstatic. This was the culmination of everything they had invested in Sophie. Her charm had landed her the perfect match. The night of the engagement party held at my parents' house, and of course planned by me, Sophie made her grand announcement. "Liam and I don't just want a wedding," she declared, holding up her glass of champagne, her eyes sweeping across the adoring crowd. "We want an experience, a fairy tale, and I found the perfect place to make it happen, the Blackwood Manor." A collective gasp went through the room. The Blackwood Manor wasn't just a wedding venue, it was an institution. A historic estate with rolling hills, a grand ballroom with crystal chandeliers, and a guest list that was booked solid for 2 years. It was also notoriously breathtakingly expensive. A standard wedding there started at 6 figures. I saw my father pale slightly, but my mother, caught up in the moment, clapped her hands together. "Oh, Sophie, it's perfect. You deserve nothing less," she exclaimed. Later that evening, after the guests had left, the 4 of them, my parents, Sophie and Liam, sat me down in the living room. It felt less like a conversation and more like a briefing. "So, the Blackwood Manor it is," my father said, trying to sound confident. "We've already called them. They have a cancellation in 8 months. It feels like fate." Sophie beamed. "And Clara, this is where you come in. Can you imagine a more perfect project for you? The manor is a blank canvas. My mother sealed the deal. Of course you'll plan it all, sweetie. It will be your wedding gift to your sister." There it was. Not a request, but an expectation. The assumption that my time, my expertise, and my professional resources were theirs for the taking. I felt the familiar weight of obligation settle on my shoulders. A wedding at the manor was a massive undertaking, a project my firm would charge a client a substantial fee for. But looking at Sophie's ecstatic face and the proud smiles of my parents, I did what I always did. I buried my own feelings and agreed. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I'd be happy to." In my mind, I justified it. Maybe this was the project that would finally make them see me as a professional. Maybe planning a flawless wedding at a venue of that caliber would earn me the respect I had craved for so long. It was a foolish hope, but it was all I had. The initial consultation with the manor's event manager, a stern but professional man named Mr. Harrison, was an eye-opener. I went alone, armed with my portfolio and a list of questions. My parents and Sophie couldn't be bothered with the boring details. As Mr. Harrison walked me through the contract, the sheer scale of the costs was laid bare. The venue fee, the catering minimums, the security deposit, it was even more than I had anticipated. My parents had a comfortable life, but I knew their finances. This was going to stretch them to their absolute limit, if not break them. When I presented the preliminary budget to my father, he waved it away. "Don't worry about the numbers, Clara. Just make it beautiful. We'll handle the finances." His bravado didn't fool me. I saw the flicker of panic in his eyes before he masked it. But he had made his promise to his golden child, and he would not back down, at least not yet. So I dove in, pouring all my professional energy into planning my sister's fairy tale. I negotiated with vendors, designed floor plans, and managed a timeline that grew more complex by the day. I was treating this as a high-stakes project for my most important client, hoping my dedication would finally bridge the gap between Clara the daughter and Clara the professional. They saw my agreement as their right, not a favor. And that assumption was the first crack in a foundation that was about to crumble in the most spectacular way imaginable. The months leading up to the wedding were a masterclass in my family's dysfunction. My role quickly devolved from planner to miracle worker to finally scapegoat. The cracks in their financial facade began to show, and I was the one expected to patch them up with my time and energy. The first major incident was the dress. Sophie, accompanied by my mother, went to a high-end bridal boutique and fell in love with a custom-designed gown that cost as much as a small car. They purchased it without a second thought. That same evening, my father called me. "Clara," he said, his voice strained, "we might have gone a little over budget on the dress. I need you to see where you can cut back. Maybe find a cheaper caterer, or perhaps fewer flowers." I was staring at a catering proposal from the Manor's exclusive 5-star chef. Cutting corners wasn't an option. "Dad, the Manor has a required catering minimum per person. We can't just find a cheaper option," I explained calmly. "Well, figure something out," he snapped before hanging up. I ended up renegotiating the floral contract, sacrificing the grand centerpieces I had designed to free up a few $1,000s a drop in the ocean compared to the cost of the dress. No one noticed or thanked me. Next came the guest list. My parents saw the wedding as a prime opportunity to impress their business associates and social circle. The list, originally set at a manageable 150, ballooned to over 250 people. The Blackwood Manor's ballroom had a strict capacity of 200. When I pointed this out, showing them the fire code regulations on the contract, my mother waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, they can squeeze a few more tables in. Just be charming, Clara. That's what you do, right? Talk to people." It took a tense hour-long call with Mr. Harrison, where I had to use every ounce of my professional goodwill to get him to approve a special layout for 220, and that was his absolute final offer. My parents then handed me the impossible task of cutting 30 people from their list of invitees, which inevitably led to them blaming me for the awkward phone calls they had to make. The planning meetings were the worst. They were held at my parents' house, usually on a Sunday afternoon. I would arrive with my laptop, detailed spreadsheets, timelines, and vendor confirmations. Sophie and my mother would sit on the couch, flipping through bridal magazines, only half listening. I'd present a detailed timeline for the wedding day, broken down into 15-minute increments. "This is too rigid," Sophie would complain. "I want it to feel spontaneous." The next week, she would panic because she didn't know when the makeup artist was supposed to arrive. I presented 3 different catering menus, all carefully selected to fit within the revised budget. My mother would dismiss them all. "None of this feels special enough. Can't they make your grandmother's pot roast recipe?" she'd ask, completely oblivious to the fact that a Michelin-starred kitchen doesn't work from family recipes for 220 guests. They would change their minds about the color scheme, the band, the cake flavor, sometimes multiple times in 1 week. Each change required hours of work on my end, canceling orders, reissuing contracts, and smoothing things over with frustrated vendors. When I would gently point out that these last-minute changes were creating chaos, my mother would give me a pitying look. "Don't be so stressed, sweetie. It's a party. You're supposed to be having fun." The breaking point for my denial came not from my family, but from a colleague. I had hired a photographer I frequently worked with, a talented and no-nonsense woman named Jessica. We were doing a site visit at the Manor one afternoon. After I spent 20 minutes on the phone with my mother, who was having a meltdown because the shade of ivory on the invitations wasn't creamy enough, Jessica turned to me. She had overheard my side of the conversation, a patient, placating monologue. "Clara, can I be honest?" she said, her expression serious. "I've worked hundreds of weddings. I've dealt with demanding clients, budget crises, and family drama. But I have never seen anyone treat their planner, let alone their own daughter, the way your family treats you." I started to offer a defense, the usual, "They're just stressed," but she held up a hand. "They're not just stressed. They are exploiting you. They have handed you an impossible task with an insufficient budget and zero respect for your expertise. They talk to you like you're an intern, not the professional who is single-handedly saving this entire event from collapsing." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. Hearing it from an outsider, someone whose professional opinion I respected, shattered the fragile illusion I had been maintaining. It wasn't normal. It wasn't just family being family. It was deeply, fundamentally unfair. I had been so focused on proving my worth to them that I had allowed them to strip it away completely. I finished the walk through in a daze, Jessica's words echoing in my head. I was tired of being the family problem solver, the shock absorber who soaked up all their stress and irresponsibility. But I still wasn't prepared for just how far they were willing to push me, or the callousness of the request that was yet to come. The final straw came 2 weeks before the wedding. It was a Tuesday night. The final, non-refundable payment of $50,000 was due to the Blackwood Manor that Friday. All the vendor contracts had been finalized, the RSVPs were in, and the seating chart was a complex work of art. I was running on caffeine and adrenaline, but everything was against all odds on track. My father called me around 9 p.m. "Clara, can you come over? Your mother and I need to talk to you about something important." His voice was low and strained. "Don't tell Sophie." A knot of dread formed in my stomach. I drove to their house, my mind racing. When I walked in, they were sitting in the dimly lit family room, no TV on, just 2 glasses of whiskey on the coffee table. This was serious. "What's wrong?" I asked, remaining standing. My father took a long swallow of his drink before speaking. "Clara, we've run into a little snag with the finances." I waited, my heart sinking. I knew this was coming. "The thing is," my mother chimed in, twisting her hands in her lap, "we don't have the final payment for the manor. We thought we could move some investments around, but the market is down and, well, the money just isn't there." I stared at them, speechless. For months, they had assured me everything was under control. They had brushed off my budget concerns, spent lavishly on the dress and other non-essentials, all while knowing they were heading for a cliff. "So what's the plan?" I finally asked, my voice flat. This is where the request came. The one that was so outrageously selfish, so dismissive of my entire identity, that it would sever any remaining thread of obligation I felt towards them. "Well," my father said, leaning forward, his eyes pleading, "we can't tell Sophie. It would crush her. This wedding is everything to her. So we need you to handle it," my mother added, her voice gaining a hint of its usual manipulative sweetness. "You're the planner. You need to call Mr. Harrison at the manor first thing in the morning. And tell him what I asked, though I already knew the answer. Tell him there's been a double booking," my father said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Tell him the venue made a mistake. Tell him whatever you have to. We need you to cancel the contract. You'll have to be the bad guy, we know, but you're strong. You can take it." My mother added the final crushing blow. "Then we need you to find a replacement venue. Maybe a nice community hall or a hotel ballroom. You're so good at making things look beautiful on a budget. You can spin it to Sophie, make it seem like a more intimate and personal choice." I just stood there, the silence in the room buzzing in my ears. They weren't just asking me to fix their mess. They were asking me to lie. They were asking me to throw away my professional reputation by fabricating a story that would make a prestigious venue look incompetent. They were asking me to personally deliver the news that would shatter my sister's dream and to take the full force of her disappointment and rage. They wanted me to be the villain in a story they had written with their own irresponsibility and pride. They saw me not as their daughter, but as a tool, a disposable shield to protect their perfect golden child from a problem of their own making. In that moment, looking at their expectant faces, I realized they weren't asking for help. They were giving me an order. They had pushed me, used me, and undervalued me my entire life, and now they were asking me to set myself on fire to keep them warm. And for the first time in my 32 years, I decided not to follow their order. A strange calm washed over me. I finally saw them for who they truly were. "Okay," I said, my voice eerily steady. "Let me see what I can do. I'll handle it." They sagged with relief, thanking me profusely. They didn't notice the coldness in my eyes or the finality in my tone. They thought I was going to fix it their way. They had no idea I was about to fix it my way. I drove home that night, not in a panic, but with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of familial obligation had finally lifted, burned away by the sheer audacity of their request. They thought I was a struggling planner with a little hobby. They thought my only power lay in my ability to be charming and practical. They had no idea who I had become while they weren't paying attention. Here's my secret, the one I had kept, not out of spite, but because I knew they would never truly understand it. 2 years ago, Elysian Events had its breakout year. I landed a massive contract to organize a multi-day tech conference, and I executed it flawlessly. The success was a springboard. My business grew exponentially. I hired more staff, moved into a beautiful downtown office, and started attracting a wealthier clientele. I was no longer just a planner. I was the CEO of a thriving company. But the biggest move, the one I was most proud of, happened 6 months ago. The Blackwood Manor, the crown jewel of event venues in our state, had run into financial trouble under its previous ownership. Through a series of quiet, strategic negotiations, my company, Elysian Events, acquired it. I didn't just have a good relationship with Mr. Harrison, the venue manager. He was my employee. He reported directly to me. The entire estate, the ballroom, the rolling hills, it was all mine. I had kept the acquisition quiet, listed under my company's corporate name. I knew if my family found out, they would either dismiss it or worse, feel entitled to it. So I said nothing. I let them continue to believe I was just their practical daughter with a cute side project. That ignorance was now my greatest asset. When I got home, I didn't sleep. I sat at my desk and I began to plan. Their crisis was my opportunity not for revenge, but for liberation. The first call I made was at 8 a.m. the next morning to Mr. Harrison. "Mr. Harrison, it's Clara," I said. "Good morning, Miss Vance," he replied, his voice formal and professional. He was the only one who knew my full story. "Is everything all right with the Vance Miller wedding?" He always used my parents' and sisters' names, maintaining the illusion. "Everything is perfect," I said. "However, I need you to play a small role for me. My family, the clients in this case, believe they are unable to make the final payment. They are going to ask me to cancel the event. I need you to be unhelpful. Tell me the payment is non-negotiable and the deadline is firm." There was a pause on the other end, then a low chuckle. "I believe I understand, Miss Vance. Consider it done. We will be absolutely inflexible. Thank you, Mr. Harrison. Also, please have the final venue contract and all associated billing documents ready for signature on the wedding night. I'll be closing out the account personally." "Of course," he said. "Will that be all?" "Yes," I replied, a slow smile spreading across my face. The show must go on. Next, I called my parents. I put on my best stressed but determined voice. "I've spoken to the manor," I said, sighing dramatically. "They are being incredibly difficult. They won't budge on the payment and refuse to refund the initial deposit. They said if we don't pay by Friday, they'll give the date to someone on their wait list." I could hear the panic on their end. "What are we going to do?" my mother wailed. This was the critical moment. "Don't worry," I said, my voice a soothing balm on their self-inflicted wound. "I have an idea. It's a long shot, but I have some savings and an emergency business line of credit. I think I can cover it, but I'll be financially drained for a while. This will have to be my wedding gift to Sophie, all of it." The relief in their voices was sickeningly palpable. "Oh, Clara, you're a lifesaver," my father gushed. "We knew we could count on you. We'll pay you back, of course, someday." I knew someday meant never, and I didn't care. The money was irrelevant. The final payment would simply be a transfer from one of my company's accounts to another. What I had just bought wasn't my sister's wedding. It was my freedom. I had positioned myself as their savior, the one who sacrificed everything for the family. They had no idea they were walking straight into a trap of their own making. For the next 2 weeks, I was the hero. They praised my generosity and resourcefulness. They told Sophie how I had moved heaven and earth to save her wedding. They were so busy congratulating themselves on having such a useful daughter that they never once stopped to ask how I had managed to pull together $50,000 on such short notice. They simply accepted it because my role was to solve problems, not to have a life complex enough to have that kind of money. My family thought they were sending me to fall on my sword. They had no idea I was just sharpening it. The wedding would go on more beautiful and flawless than they could ever have imagined. But the finale was going to be one they never saw coming, and I would be the one conducting the orchestra. The wedding day arrived, a perfect sun-drenched Saturday in June. The Blackwood Manor looked like something out of a fairy tale. My team from Elysian Events, whom I'd told were working a VIP confidential wedding, had executed every detail to perfection. The flowers were breathtaking, the music was sublime, and the food was exquisite. My sister Sophie was a radiant bride floating through the day in a bubble of blissful ignorance. My parents played the role of proud hosts to the hilt, greeting their guests with wide smiles, their financial panic a distant memory. I moved through the event like a ghost, a silent director ensuring everything ran smoothly. I oversaw the ceremony, cued the musicians, and managed the transition to the cocktail hour. My family barely spoke to me other than to issue a command. Clara, the champagne is running low at table 3. Clara, find my shawl. I was no longer a guest. I was staff, and I was fine with that. I knew my moment was coming. It happened during the reception toasts. The ballroom was glowing, the crystal chandeliers casting a warm light on the 220 guests. After the best man gave his speech, my father stood up, tapping his glass for attention. He looked regal in his tuxedo, a proud patriarch presiding over his perfect family. He gave a long, heartfelt speech about Sophie, his beautiful, brilliant daughter. He welcomed Liam to the family. He thanked their friends for coming, and then he turned his attention to me. I also want to give a special thank you to my older daughter Clara, he began, and for a fleeting second I thought he might actually acknowledge my work. I was wrong. He smiled a wide, patronizing grin. We're so lucky that her little event planning hobby finally came in handy. I don't know what we would have done without her. She really managed to make this day beautiful on a budget, he raised his glass. To Clara, for her practical talents, he laughed. My mother laughed. Sophie, caught up in her own world, laughed along with them. A smattering of confused, polite chuckles came from the guests, who didn't understand the inside joke. But I understood. Even here on a day I had single-handedly saved and paid for, he couldn't resist the dig. He had to remind everyone of my place to frame my professional success as a cute amateur pastime. He had to reduce me to my designated role, the practical, budget-conscious helper. The laughter died down. My father was about to sit, but I was already moving. I walked calmly to the head table and took the microphone from his surprised hand. Thank you, Dad, I said, my voice clear and steady, amplified throughout the silent ballroom. I'm so glad everyone is enjoying the evening here at the Blackwood Manor. It truly is a special place. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on Mr. Harrison, who was standing discreetly by the main entrance, just as we had arranged. I gave him a slight nod. Dad, you mentioned my hobby, and I just want to say you're right. It has been a very rewarding hobby, I continued, my voice dripping with false sincerity. In fact, it has been so rewarding that I'm now in a position to finalize the last piece of business for this wonderful evening. I turned to Mr. Harrison. Mr. Harrison, if you wouldn't mind, I believe you have the final venue contract for me to sign. It's always important to settle the bill. A murmur went through the crowd. My parents exchanged a confused look. Sophie frowned, annoyed that I was stealing her spotlight. Mr. Harrison walked forward holding a leather-bound clipboard. He handed it to me with a respectful nod. I clicked the pen. You see, I said, addressing my father but speaking to the entire room, the truth is, you weren't entirely wrong about the budget. There was a moment when it seemed this beautiful day might not be possible. I looked directly at my parents, whose faces were now frozen in dawning horror. But luckily, I was in a unique position to help. I held up the pen. You see, my little hobby, my company, Elysian Events, did more than just plan this wedding. As part of a strategic expansion 6 months ago, we acquired the Blackwood Manor. A collective gasp rippled through the guests. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father's face went from ruddy to ghostly white. Sophie stared at me, her perfect smile melting into a mask of disbelief. So the reason there was no issue with that final $50,000 payment, I said, pressing the pen to the paper with deliberate force, is because I am the owner. I paid for it. In fact, I paid for all of it. I signed my name, Clara Vance, CEO, Elysian Events, on the signature line of the owner's copy of the contract. Consider it my real wedding gift, Sophie, I said, looking at my sister. A fairy tale wedding with no expense spared. And a lesson for you, Dad. Never, ever underestimate the practical daughter. I placed the pen down on the clipboard. The music had stopped. The waiters had frozen in place. The laughter had died. And in the deafening silence of that grand ballroom, all you could hear was the sound of a carefully constructed illusion shattering into a million pieces. I didn't wait for the applause or the condemnation. I simply placed the microphone back on its stand, gave a small, tight smile to the stunned head table, and walked away. I didn't run. I walked with a straight back and a steady pace, heading directly for the ballroom's grand entrance, where Mr. Harrison was holding the door for me. As I passed the guests' tables, I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, but I didn't look at them. My focus was on the cool night air that awaited me outside. My exit was the final unspoken statement. I had not come for a fight. I had come to state a fact, to draw a line, to reclaim my own story. My part in their fairy tale was over. As I stepped outside, the sounds of the party, confused murmurs slowly building into a frantic buzz, faded behind me. I took a deep breath, the scent of jasmine from the manor's gardens filling my lungs. It was the first breath I felt I had taken in months that wasn't heavy with obligation or resentment. It was the breath of freedom. I didn't go far. I walked to my car in the reserved owner's spot, a small perk I had never used until tonight, and sat inside, the engine off. I just needed a moment to let the reality of what I had done sink in. I hadn't just revealed a secret. I had detonated a bomb in the middle of my family's carefully curated life. Within minutes, my phone, which I had placed on the passenger seat, began to light up. First, a call from my mother. I ignored it. Then another. Then a text, "Clara, what was that? You've humiliated us. Call me now." Then a call from my father. Ignored. Then a text from Sophie. "How could you do this to me on my wedding day? You ruined everything." I turned the phone off. Their reactions were predictable. In their world, their humiliation was the crime, not the years of disrespect that had led to it. They weren't angry because I was successful. They were angry because I had exposed their narrative as a lie. I called the one person I knew would understand. "Jessica," I said when she answered. "Clara, oh my God, I'm still inside." "You are a legend," she whispered breathlessly into the phone. "You should see the chaos here. Your parents are trying to do damage control, and your sister looks like she's seen a ghost." "Are you okay to wrap things up?" I asked, my voice still shaking slightly. "Are you kidding? My team and I have got this. You did the hard part. Now go home and get some rest. You've earned it." Hearing her voice so full of admiration and support was the only validation I needed. I started the car and drove away from Blackwood Manor, not looking back in the rearview mirror. Driving through the winding country roads, I felt a profound sense of peace settle over me. For years, I had been orbiting my family's drama, my own life and accomplishments relegated to the background. Tonight, I had pulled myself out of their gravitational field and set my own course. I arrived back at my house, a modern minimalist home that I had bought, and decorated myself a space that was entirely mine. I walked in, kicked off my uncomfortable heels, and poured myself a glass of water. The silence of my home felt like a sanctuary. There were no demands, no passive-aggressive comments, no weight of expectation. There was just me. I had closed the book on my old life, on the role of the underappreciated daughter and sister. I didn't know what my relationship with my family would look like in the future, or if there would even be one. But for the first time, I felt like that was a choice I would get to make. I wasn't sad. I was free. I had stepped off their stage, and I couldn't wait to start writing the script for my own show. 10 months after what my extended family now referred to in hushed, dramatic tones as the Manor incident, my life was unrecognizable in the best possible way. The dust from the explosion I had set off that night had long since settled, and where there was once the rubble of a dysfunctional family dynamic, I had begun to build a new foundation, one mortared with self-respect and reinforced with boundaries of steel. The quiet that followed the storm wasn't an empty silence. It was a peaceful, expansive space where I could finally hear my own thoughts, my own desires, my own ambitions, without the constant, deafening static of my family's expectations. My professional life, once a source of quiet, private pride, became a public testament to my capabilities. The story of the wedding, though I never once spoke of it to a journalist or a blogger, took on a life of its own. It seeped into the high society gossip mill passed along by wedding guests who had witnessed the entire spectacle. But the narrative that emerged wasn't one of a family squabble. It was the story of a brilliant, underestimated businesswoman who had outmaneuvered everyone. Far from damaging my reputation, it turned me into something of a local legend. I was no longer just a competent planner. I was the planner who didn't just create fairy tales. She owned the castle. The effect on Elysian events was seismic. The phone began to ring with a different caliber of client. The inquiries were no longer just from wealthy local families, but from national brands wanting to host product launches from tech companies, planning international conferences from nonprofits, organizing high-stakes, fundraising, galas. They weren't just hiring a planner. They were hiring a strategist, a visionary, someone they knew could handle immense pressure with grace and precision. The Blackwood Manor, under my direct management, became more successful than ever. We streamlined its operations, updated its offerings, and it quickly became the most sought-after luxury venue in the region, a testament to what was possible when passion was paired with professionalism, not just entitlement. 4 months ago, I did something I never would have dreamed of before. I agreed to a feature in a prestigious national business magazine for their annual Women in Leadership issue. The photo shoot took place in the grand ballroom of the manor. I stood there, not in a simple black planner's outfit, but in a tailored power suit, the crystal chandeliers glittering above me. The article's headline read, "Clara Vance, the architect of her own empire." Seeing those words in print next to a photo of me looking directly at the camera, confident and in control, was a profoundly healing moment. I bought 10 copies. I sent one to my aunt. The rest I kept for myself. It was a tangible piece of evidence, a daily reminder that my work was not, and had never been, a little hobby. On a personal level, the change was even more profound. The vast reserves of emotional energy I had once spent managing my family's anxieties and egos were now free to be invested in myself. I started saying yes to things I had never had time for before. Weekend trips, art classes, quiet evenings with a good book, and no fear of an impending crisis call. I started dating again cautiously, at first wary of falling into old patterns of putting someone else's needs before my own. Then I met Daniel. It was at a charity gala I was organizing at the manor. He was an architect, and he approached me not to talk about the floral arrangements, but to discuss the structural integrity of the ballroom's vaulted ceiling. Our first conversation was about load-bearing walls and historical preservation. He was brilliant, kind, and had a quiet, observant humor that I found incredibly attractive. But what truly captivated me was how he saw me. When I eventually told him the story of my company, my family, the wedding, he didn't see a soap opera. He saw a strategic masterpiece. He didn't say, "That must have been so dramatic." He said, "That must have taken incredible courage." He celebrated my ambition. He admired my grit. He saw my success not as a threat or a hobby or a tool, but as an essential part of who I was. For the first time in my life, I felt truly seen by a partner. As for my family, their world had been irrevocably altered. The public humiliation at the wedding was a catastrophic blow to my father's pride and my parents' carefully curated social standing. They had built their identity around the image of the powerful, generous patriarch and his perfect, charming family. When that image was shattered in front of 200 of their closest friends and business associates, the fallout was immediate. I heard secondhand that the weeks following the wedding were filled with awkward phone calls and canceled dinner invitations. Their friends didn't know how to react. Was Clara a hero or a villain? Were my parents victims or fools? The ambiguity was worse than any clear judgment. It left them socially isolated, forced into a period of quiet reflection they had spent their entire lives avoiding. Sophie and Liam's fairy tale came to a screeching halt the moment they stepped off the plane from their honeymoon in Bali. They returned to a new reality, one where I was no longer the family's logistical and emotional cruise director. Without my parents' bottomless financial support, which had been severely curtailed by their own social and financial embarrassment, and without me to organize their lives, Sophie was adrift. Liam, a fundamentally decent man who had fallen in love with the effortless, sparkling illusion of Sophie, was now married to a woman who was paralyzed by the mundane realities of adult life. The grapevine, through a cousin who remained neutral, delivered a particularly telling story. Apparently, they had a massive argument over assembling a flat-pack bookcase. Liam had expected Sophie to at least read the instructions while he worked, but she had dissolved into tears, complaining that it was too confusing and ugly, and that, in her old life, someone would have just handled it for her. Their first few months of marriage were, I was told, a brutal crash course, in reality, for both of them. About 6 months after the wedding, I received the email from Sophie. It arrived on a Tuesday morning, a single paragraph that was so perfectly representative of her entire worldview. "Hi, Clara," it began. "Liam and I finally bought a small condo and we're thinking of having a housewarming party. We were wondering if you could help us plan it, just something small." The casualness of it was breathtaking. The word help, a verb she had used to command my professional services for years. Just something small, the classic downplaying of the effort required. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the past. It was a test, plain and simple. A probe sent out to see if the old power dynamic could be reestablished, to see if enough time had passed for me to fall back into my old role. I stared at the email for a long time. The old Clara would have agonized over it. She would have felt a surge of hope seeing it as a potential olive branch. She would have weighed her hurt against her sense of familial duty. But the new Clara, the CEO, the woman who had just been featured in a national magazine, knew exactly what to do. I opened a new message and wrote a polite, professional, and completely impersonal reply. "Hi, Sophie. Congratulations on the new condo. That's wonderful news. I'd be happy to discuss your event. My team at Elysian Events specializes in creating beautiful, intimate gatherings. I've attached my company's standard consultation rates and our package options for private parties. Please feel free to look them over. If you'd like to move forward, you can book a preliminary consultation through the link on our website. All the best, Clara." I hit send, and then the most wonderful thing happened: nothing. I never got a reply. Days turned into weeks. The silence was my answer. She hadn't wanted to hire a planner. She had wanted her sister the free built-in problem solver. The moment a price tag was attached to my time and expertise, I was no longer of use to her. And in that silence, I felt a final, quiet click of a lock falling into place. That door was closed for good. My relationship with my parents remains a delicate, ongoing negotiation. They called me about a month after the wedding, a call initiated by my father, which was in itself a monumental event. It was awkward and stilted. There were no grand apologies, but I didn't need them anymore. What I heard for the first time in his voice was a note of caution, of uncertainty. It was the sound of a man who had finally realized he was speaking to an equal, not a subordinate. "We have a new dynamic now, one of polite distance. We exchange carefully worded texts on birthdays and holidays. I saw them at Christmas at my aunt's house, a neutral territory. The conversation was about the weather, about sports, about anything other than the truth. They may never fully understand or acknowledge their role in the past, but they understand the new rules. The old dynamic is gone, replaced by a quiet, empty space. Maybe one day, years from now, that space can be filled with something new and healthier. But for now, the peace that space provides is more than enough. Justice, I've learned, isn't always a loud, dramatic verdict. Sometimes it's the quiet, inevitable consequence of people having to finally live with the choices they've made. Looking back on that journey now, 10 months later, from the girl who cried in her car over a casual dismissal to the woman who signed that contract in front of 200 stunned guests, I realized the most important thing I built wasn't a business, it was a backbone. For years, I operated under a silent, deeply ingrained belief that my primary function within my family was to be a shock absorber. My job was to keep the peace. But what I've come to understand is that the peace I was keeping wasn't peace at all. It was a fragile, exhausting truce bought and paid for with my silence, my energy, and my self-respect. It was the kind of quiet that exists in a house where everyone is walking on eggshells, and I was the one who had volunteered to lay down on the floor and become the carpet. The biggest lesson I learned wasn't about revenge or the sweet satisfaction of proving them wrong, though I admit there was a fleeting satisfaction in that moment. The real lasting victory was in proving myself right. For my entire life, I had a quiet inner voice telling me I was capable, that my work had value, that I deserved to be seen. But I allowed my family's narrative to shout over it. They had assigned me a role. The practical, reliable, unglamorous daughter and I had played my part with dutiful precision. I had to finally accept the painful truth that they might never see my worth, not because it wasn't there, but because my being lesser was a necessary part of their worldview. My practicality existed to enable Sophie's irresponsibility. My quiet competence existed to make her chaotic charm seem more dazzling. My financial independence existed so they could pour their resources into her. We were two sides of a coin, and they only ever valued the shiny side. The moment I stopped needing their approval was the moment I truly became powerful. It wasn't a switch I flipped. It was a slow, painful dawning. It was the realization that I had been waiting for an invitation to a party that I was already hosting. I was waiting for them to acknowledge the value of a kingdom that I had already built all by myself while they weren't looking. Their dismissal, their very blindness to my success, turned out to be a strange and unexpected gift. While all their attention was a spotlight on Sophie, I was building in the shadows. Their neglect gave me the space to grow without their interference, without their doubts, without their practical advice. My invisibility became my superpower. That night at the wedding wasn't just about exposing a financial lie. It was about exposing a lifetime of emotional imbalance. The $50,000 check was just a number on a piece of paper. The real bankruptcy in our family was one of character and emotional honesty. Their inability to pay was a simple financial miscalculation. Their decision to ask me, their daughter, to lie, to professionally self-destruct, to become the villain, to save their own pride, that was the true, unforgivable betrayal. It told me everything I needed to know. They weren't just asking me to fix a problem. They were asking me to erase myself so their perfect picture could remain intact. And in doing so, they handed me the scissors. I finally understood that these roles we are assigned in childhood, the golden child, the scapegoat, the peacemaker, the practical one, are cages, and they are cages for everyone involved. My sister Sophie was as much a prisoner of her role as I was of mine. She was raised to believe her charm was her only currency, so she never had to develop resilience, responsibility, or a genuine work ethic. Her fairy tale life left her completely unprepared for reality. When the applause stops and the bills come due, what is the golden child left with? I don't feel anger towards her now, just a profound sense of sadness for the capable woman she might have become if she had ever been allowed to fail. This journey has also forced me to redefine what the word family means. For so long, I believed it was an unbreakable bond of obligation. You show up, you help, you endure, because that's what family does. Now, I know that real family is a bond of mutual respect. It's the people who see you clearly and love you, not just for what you can do for them, but for who you are. My chosen family, my team at Elysian events, my friend Jessica, who saw my struggle and spoke the truth, my new partner Daniel, who celebrates my ambition, they have taught me what true support feels like. It's not about blood. It's about the people who help you feel more yourself, not less. So what about forgiveness? It's a question I've asked myself many times. Have I forgiven them? The answer is complex. I have forgiven them in the sense that I no longer carry the anger. I have let go of the hope that they will change, that they will one day wake up and offer the apology I always dreamed of. Forgiveness for me has been the act of accepting them for who they are, and then loving them from a safe distance. Our relationship now is polite, it's civil, and it's bounded by the strong, clear walls I've built around my own life and well-being. And because of that distance, it is healthier than it has ever been. This entire experience has been the most painful and most liberating of my life. It was a crucible that burned away the person I thought I was supposed to be and revealed the woman I truly am. One who is strong, capable, and unapologetically successful. A woman whose hobby can buy castles. A woman whose value is not determined by a toast at a wedding, but by the empire she has the courage to build for herself brick by painstaking brick. And that brings me to you, to everyone watching. My story is my own, but I know the feelings are universal. We are all cast in roles by the people around us at work, with friends, and especially in our families. We become the responsible one, the funny one, the emotional one, the one who always has it together. And we can play those parts for so long that we forget they're just a costume. We forget who we are underneath. So I want to ask you this: what invisible role have you been assigned in your life? Are you the peacemaker, the provider, the one who never needs anything but is always there to give? And more importantly, what would it take for you to step off that stage and show the world who you truly are? Share your story, your thoughts, your own moment of clarity in the comments below. I want to hear them. Your stories matter, and they remind us all that we are not alone in these struggles. If this story resonated with you, if it made you feel seen, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel for more stories of real-life breakthroughs, and share it with someone who might be struggling to find their own voice. Sometimes seeing someone else break free gives us the courage to find our own key. Thank you for listening to my story. And remember, your value is not a role assigned to you by others. It is the life you have the courage to build for yourself.